Now, I learned on the pilot scheme that working in a size manner is really, really important. Really, I think for business in general, not just social property investment business, but in this case, it's even more so important that you work in a systemized manner. And that's because it's a very complex role to be in. There are lots of different people involved, lots of different organisations. There are lots of different pieces of paperwork involved. There's lots of rules and regulations and laws that you have to abide by. So it's really, really important to be organised and to be methodical in the way that you work. So, as you already know, I came from the local authority. So when I moved over into my own self-employment, it was quite easy to incorporate some of the ways that I'd been used to working in the local council and just move those over and carry on working that way, almost like a mini council within my own workplace, just me. So local hoops for things, and when it comes to procedures and systemized ways of working, they really do set the level high. I was used to, when I worked in the local authority, having a procedure or sort of like an instruction manual for every problem I may encounter as an employee of that organisation. So if you think about a place like a local authority, they can't just be very ad hoc at the way that they do things. They're employing thousands of people within an environment, and lots of people. There might be changes over of staff, and there could be people off sick. There could be a turnover of people moving departments. So it's really, really important that everybody is working in the same way. And so if there's any gaps in service, they can be filled in, and people can go and learn how to do a role quite quickly, because there will be very detailed instructions around every single thing to do with that role. So it's a really, really good way to work. I know it's a boring way to work, and I know a lot of people can't be bothered to put all of the work in that it takes to systemize their business, but it really is worth doing, because if you're able to create systems that make you work in a more efficient manner, then that can be replicated again and again, and you're not going to be chasing around doing things over and over again with no clear direction or goal. If you have a set goal and you have an objective and you have an understanding of how you're hoping to get there, then that's going to make things so much easier for you when you attempt to move down that path. So systems, strategies, procedures for me is very important, and you can strategies quite easy. So it's just really defining your goals and having a little map and almost quite a simplified plan of how you're going to step back bit by bit, so you can then move forward and start achieving those goals. And the systemized, that breaks things down a little bit more. So when you're systemizing, you're basically stripping it down and looking at operational tasks within your business that you can transfer and make them try and make them almost like a step by step to doing something, and you may be able to alter some of those steps and make things a little bit easier for yourself. You may find that if you add an extra step in, it actually saves you a day's worth of work on something else. So if you have a record of all this, and as I say, you have a systemized way of working, and you jot down how you do things when you're doing them, and if you have success with them, then you know that's a way to replicate and keep doing. And if you don't have success, equally, then you know that that's something not to be repeated, and that's an area that needs attention for you to look at enhancing in some way or changing in some way. So systemized ways of working is really important, and you can see from my screen some of the systems that I implement for social property investment. And at later stages of the course, in more advanced levels of the course, we will look at systemized ways of working in much more detail, and we'll look at specific systems for specific problems. So what we'll do here is we'll tie in, we haven't looked at an application yet. So when your tenant moves into a property, what's the kind of system that you can put in place to make sure that that's a smooth transition? So looking to give you a bit of a case study of systemized way of working, we're going to have a look at an application. situation. And we've got John, who is our case study for today. And John was somebody who came from a bed and breakfast. So he already had a local housing allowance claim in payment, and he was getting that was getting paid directly to the temporary housing unit that he was staying in. Excuse me. He had no bank account, so if he'd have wanted to make a claim for housing allowance, and if he'd have wanted to have that payment to himself, that would have been a challenge for him because he didn't have any bank account details to put down on the housing benefit form. He also had quite little ID, and that was a challenge. So we would have had to make sure, firstly, that everything was in place, that he was going to be able to meet the criteria of the credit union. So when we go through our screening processes, we're looking at what we can, we've already covered this part, but we're looking at identifying potential issues and also solutions how we can get around them. So we can see here some of the potential issues with John, and we can see, for example, one of the ways of getting around the getting around the bank issue is by assisting him to open up a credit union account. So this case here is a pretty bog standard typical case that I would deal with on the pilot scheme, and so lots of these types of cases repeated again and again and again. So presumably this is the type of type of case study that you will see in applications too. So if there's a local housing allowance claim already in place, it makes life a little bit easier, because one of the biggest challenges we've got in overcoming in getting somebody into a property is making sure they have all of the relevant identification that the council's going to need in order to pay them a benefit claim. So here we can see that a benefit claim is already in payment, so that makes life 10 times easier. And we also know from seeing that this claim is in payment, we know that this tenant has had, or at some stage when he applied for the claim at least, he had enough identification in order to get that claim started. So this guy does hold ID, even though he's telling me he's got nothing and he doesn't think he's got the ID. He actually, I know he's going to, because one of the forms of ID he's going to have for a start is his paperwork surrounding his already active local housing allowance claim. So that straight away is going to count as a form of identification. So we talked already in screening, but it's good to do some digging, because as you can see, what you're told may not always be what the actual situation is. So this looked a bleaker situation than potentially it had to. It's actually very easy to do a change of circumstances with the local authority. So to change from moving the payment, going from the temporary establishment to the landlord, and what we'll do to assist the tenant out with his budgeting needs and his and moving on in life and getting him some stability with his money, etc. We will help him to get a credit union account, and maybe he'll get 2 credit union accounts, but we will help to interject, and we will make sure that that rental payment for the landlord is ring-fenced via the credit union, so it's reducing the risk of all parties that are involved. So you can see here how we go through this step-by-step process to getting John in the property. Now, when I first started out in this pilot scheme back in 2013, we started out, and I think my first benefit claim that went in took 6 weeks to go into payment. And I remember literally in panic on a daily basis, like, oh my God, this landlord is gonna just kill me because the rent is just not being paid. And so if I'd have carried on, if I'd have not looked at the systemized way of how I was doing things there with that claim, then I wouldn't have stayed in business very long, because I would have not a lot of landlords would have been happy of waiting 6 weeks or so to get their first payment through. So one of my with the first few LHA claims that I did, I started to look at how we could shorten the process and how we could make it a little bit more efficient, and how we could meet all of the requirements of a local authority as we're putting in that claim, but do it in a way so that they're not coming back for information all the time, because that's what really slows things down. If you send in a claim that's incomplete, then they're going to send that back, and your tenant might not even tell you that they've sent it back. You might have to keep chasing them and thinking, where's this money? Oh, we received a letter 2 weeks ago and we forgot to tell you, and we forgot to reply to it. I've seen it happen so many times. So the best way to get around things is to put a claim in complete as it should be, and as the local authority would like to see it in its perfect form. So you need to follow the instructions of each particular local authority very carefully, but generally you can have a look at the systems that I'm using here, and that should be quite a quick way of getting your claim in and getting it paid quite quickly, because your tenant is meeting all of the requirements of the local authority. Now, another part of your system for applications, which I want to point out, is putting in a letter to the local authority. Now, this is for 2 reasons. 2 letters, I should say, sorry. We want to be putting in 2 very, very important pieces of documentation should be going in with this claim, in addition to everything they're asking for. The first piece of documentation that should be going in is a disclaimer, which is going to allow you to act on your tenant's behalf and speak to the council, and you may ask your partner agency to sign that disclaimer with you. If the council is not able to give you certain information, they may give it to your partner agency. So when I was working in the pilot scheme, I was an independent party. I wasn't working with the tenant directly, and I wasn't working with the landlord directly. I was sitting in between and working with them both. So this put the council in quite a tricky situation, and I went through this with every council I worked with, and I encountered quite a few across Greater Manchester. And they were unsure. They said, we've never seen this before. Are you acting on behalf of the landlord, or are you acting on behalf of the tenant? And because I was acting on behalf of them both, and I had a disclaimer from them both, they had to give me all of the information that I needed, whichever side that came from. Now, if you're an investor, you might not be able to be in that situation, and you may only be privy to some parts of information about a claim. So, as I say, a way you could maybe get around this is to join forces with your partner agency and ask them to sign your disclaimer form, and that will then enable them to potentially gather information and assist your tenant in making sure that they've met all of their responsibilities if the council is unwilling to sometimes tell you that, because sometimes they won't share information of a personal nature with a landlord, and that's for a valid reason. But obviously we're working in a slightly different environment in social property investment, so we've got to look at ways of getting around that. And as I say, working with your partner agency and asking them to obtain information on your behalf if you're unable to is a good way of getting around that. So again, I'm just going to give you a quick last look at this sign-up procedure. And as I say, you can see that you're going through these processes step by step, and this is probably the quickest way to do things. Now, the second piece of paperwork that I want to tell you about that you need to be sending into your local authority is just a simple introduction email or letter. And we talk about this in another part of the course, but it's very important to do this when you're working with vulnerable people, and you want the local authority to know that you are assisting this person to end their homelessness stature. So you want them to work with you in a more productive fashion, because you are helping them and you are creating value for them, and it's very costly to keep homeless people on the streets. So if your local authority can see that you're being proactive and you're helping them to house the homeless, and you're doing that in ways of maybe you're reducing fees, or you're removing deposits, or you're giving them support with external agencies, you need to let the local council know that, and use that as a bit of a bargaining tool in terms of asking them to be efficient with dealing with queries. So I know that it's not strictly going to get you very far. It's not, it's not going to make anybody bend any rules for you, or it's not going to jump you up the queue any higher. But if you are seen to be working with partner agencies who are known to the local authority, and majority of partner agencies will be known to your local authority, so if you can be seen to be being responsible and joining forces with them, then you also are presenting yourself in a different light in terms of, as I say, changing the perception of landlords. And sometimes we've got a bit of a mountain to climb with that. So when you send your housing benefit claims in, let your local authority and housing benefit office know that you are removing this person from a homelessness stature, and you would appreciate their support and assistance as you move forward with that, and you would like to work in a collaborative fashion, and just, as I say, put that into writing and let them know that you are doing something a little bit different than your bog standard landlord. So I hope you've enjoyed having a look through the systemisation process, and we will, as I say, we can look at this in a lot more depth at a more advanced level of the course. For now, we're going to move on to the next part, which is all about management and support, and how you can, what's the most effective support that you can get for your tenant.